Welcome to Protecting Your Assets, the show about protecting people, property, and most importantly, protecting your ass. I'm your host, Lucky Luciano, and I'd like you to join me for a fast-paced and often fiery discussion about security issues with my co-host, Brian the Angry Man Claman. Whether we're piercing the veil of security, talking your duty of care, or raving about the latest technology, we'll share our thoughts on the issues, the trends that are impacting security today and into the future. So grab a coffee and join us for our latest podcast, and don't forget to like and follow us on our sponsor's website, brianclaman.com. And now let's talk about protecting your assets. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Protecting Your Assets. We've been a little on an unplanned hiatus over the last couple of weeks, but we are back, and we've got a special guest today, Chris Fernandes, who we will get into with a proper introduction momentarily. But before then, I'm going to welcome back my sidekick, co-host, Brian the Angry Man Claman. How you've been doing these last few weeks, and what's keeping you up these days?
Well, really good. Trying to stay cool, hoping the air conditioning system doesn't crap out. So I thought, as I've said the last several times we've done this, that I want to transition from what keeps me up from COVID to other things. But I find myself back at COVID, and I'll just take a few seconds. What sort of concerns me is, we are looking at the thought was that, society would reopen up, the downtown business core would reopen up maybe this September after Labor Day. Just as we thought last year, September 2020 was the target date, and that didn't work out because we had a third wave. Well, fast forward, history repeating itself. We now have a fourth wave, they say, is starting to raise its ugly head in Ontario. So I don't know what that does for the reopening of the downtown core. I don't know if that gets put off again. And what keeps me up at night is just thinking of my friends in commercial real estate and the industry in the downtown core. I don't think it's going to look the same when this is all over. I mean, I think the economy will do well. I think people will do well, but I don't know if they're going to be situated in the same geographic area. And instead of 200,000 people being in the financial district, maybe they're going to be up in North York or in Scarborough or in York Region. I think the landscape's going to look different, and there's going to be a lot of disruption. And I'm concerned about that, what that looks like in terms of jobs, buildings under development right now and so on.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm not going to get into COVID because, as I said in previous episodes, I'm sick and tired of talking about COVID, and we don't have a plan to go forward, so we're just going to play it by ear, I think, like most politicians are doing. So with that, I'm going to, first of all, formally introduce Chris Fernandes, our guest today, before I respond to what's keeping me up at night. And that way we can turn it right over to Chris. If he wants to weigh in on what we're talking about, or we'll go right into our topic, we can do that. So for everyone who's listening, Chris Fernandes is a retired police officer with over 32 years of law enforcement experience. He spent 28 of those years with the Toronto Police Service, attaining the rank of superintendent. And in that capacity, he was the commander of 3 units, the Toronto Anti-Violence Intervention Strategy Unit, also known as TAVIS, the Transit Patrol Unit, and the Community Mobilization Unit, which is going to be, all 3 of those units will play an integral part of today's discussion as we talk about the overlay or the integration between public and private sectors and how they relate to each other. During the last 4 years of his career, he was actually the deputy chief of the police. He was actually the deputy chief of police with the Durham Regional Police Service, where he oversaw a police service of over 700 officers and civilians and managed the budget of over $100 million. Which seems like a lot, but compared to Toronto, I think they're up at around $1 billion, which just tells you the scale is unbelievable. He recently transitioned to the private sector and is presently overseeing the security program for a property management company in downtown Toronto. So before I turn it over to you, Chris, to say some words, I have to respond to my good friend Brian as usual and give him my 2 cents on what's keeping me up at night, because it ain't COVID. Like I say, I'm sick and tired of COVID. What's really pissing me off really is the lack of government engagement again with those Canadians over in China. There's another Canadian now facing an upgrade in his sentence from life in prison now to execution, basically. And it's funny how the timing coincides with the hearings with the executive from the Chinese firm that wants to be extradited over to the U.S. So I think it's very disappointing to see our government play nice in the sandbox with a company, or sorry, a country that obviously doesn't play by the same rules. And we've got our own citizens suffering because of it. So it's really disappointing, and that's where my head's been at the last couple of days. So on that crappy note, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, where we're going to continue the conversation. You're more than welcome, obviously, to talk about either of those two issues or something else that's bothering you in recent weeks. But our discussion today is going to really be about continuing the conversation on, are we ready for the 21st century? Are the police ready for 21st century policing? Even though we're in 2021, it's still a relatively new century, and it has changed considerably over the last few months, especially probably the last 2 years, with all the the diversity movements in the U.S., the community, the defund the police movement. There's a lot of things going on that are making policing very difficult, and that's going to transition into the private sector and the security officers that need to deal with that. So that's my intro for you, Chris. Welcome. We're happy to have you, and really excited for talking to you today.
Thanks, Luciano. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, just a comment in regards to the 21st century policing. And you think when you retire that you forget about policing or you don't care. But, after spending over 32 years policing and starting at, as a kid at 21 years of age, it's in your heart, and, it doesn't leave. So, all the things that you see and that's happened in policing over the last little while, even though I've been gone from it for almost 3 years, still has that effect. So that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and probably some of the things that keeps me up at night.
Brian,
I just taking a deep breath. I know you want to sort of monopolize this part. So.
Monopolize it. I was just going to start into the questions. Because Chris, it's one thing that I didn't say in your intro, and I think it's important for our listeners to know, is that you, unlike many other police officers, and I'm certainly not slamming police officers because my brother's still a police officer. I did it myself for a number of years, and I support them 100%. But a lot of them seem to think that they retire and they transition to the private sector, and it's sort of a free pass, for lack of a better word. I've done my policing, so I know everything, and I'd like to think that you are one of those few officers who transitioned to the private sector and actually took the time to educate yourself on the security world. I believe you got your CPP. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and that's, congratulations on that. But that's, to me, is an indication of where your head's at, and someone who's always willing to learn, to expand his knowledge base, and not presume that he knows everything just because you carried a gun and a badge for 32 years. So I think that that's something that needs to be recognized, and it brings a unique perspective when it comes from you, because you can speak to both sides in competency, understanding those issues.
And I'm going to pretend I'm the prosecutor right now, or the judge. Is there a question in there, Mr. Cedrone?
Oh my God! I was just trying to give you some background and substance.
We only have 45 minutes
as to the views he brings to the table. Okay, so let's get into
Luch, just a comment on that, like and a plug for security professionals that I've had the opportunity to be part of. In Toronto back as early as 2005, 2006. I was introduced to the private security world, with yourself and Brian and, some other professional security folks. And as we work together with Toronto Police and security, private public security with, the Toronto Association of Police and Private Security program. And it was a great partnership and a great initiative. But through all those years, I learned a lot from you guys when it comes to, the security side, and how professional it was, how dedicated it was, and, the commitment that you guys brought when it came to the protection of, your assets, your people, your property, and your, in your buildings that you oversaw. So it was something that I was always interested in as time went on. And you're right, before I left policing, I pursued my CPP and obtained that, and presently studying for my PSP, just to continue that knowledge of learning more about the technology part of it. So, but in saying all that, it's not an easy transition, because policing is policing and private security. There's a lot to learn. So I think for me, I'm new in this area, in the private sector. There's a lot to learn. I've leaned on people like Brian and others, to get me up to speed. But this is a new place where I'm kind of earning my keep and gaining respect. And it's not. I think you're right, Luch. You just don't flip over and think you know it all when you have had a policing career.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and Chris, you're sort of in a unique position because you've been on both sides of the fence. And I just want to add to what you said when you were with Toronto Police and running the TAPS program or outreach at 52 Division with the security community. You were a great ambassador of the Toronto Police. Like, you opened our eyes in terms of what the police can do and what they can't do. We hopefully opened your eyes about what our world was like, and we were able to work collaboratively and support each other. And that's an important part of success, is partnerships. And you just don't see that consistently happening across the board. And we got to get back to that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Brian, because I had a call this morning with someone, a security manager downtown. He's operating a new property, and he knows Chris as well. He's been down there for a long time. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't have his permission. I don't want to presume that he wants to be noted. But the key thing that came out of that was the fact that now that he's getting back to business downtown, there is an absence of those groups. He couldn't recall who the safe group was, couldn't recall Tavis. He remembers the name, but hasn't seen them in eons because they're not around. TAPS is long dead. And it's sad to see that. And not to say that those were the days type discussion, but really the question is, Chris, what were the challenges on the policing side to get support for those units? Because it wasn't consistent, hasn't been consistent. It really depended on who was leading those units at the time in terms of their success. At least that's been my opinion and perception. And then now that you've come over to the other side, what are things that the private sector can do better to reinvigorate those groups, to reestablish those partnerships? Because now, if any time is needed for those groups to be back in play, it's now. We're getting back into a downtown core that nobody really knows what to expect. To Brian's point, what's it going to look like? We don't really know, but we do know that it's gotten a lot uglier since everyone's sort of left the downtown core. We've got people in need, mental health issues, all kinds of things going on down there that I don't think people really understand the severity of some of those issues that exist.
Yeah, so I think with the TAPS program, that partnership worked well for many years, and I think it had good leadership because it had people. My boss, and I don't want to mention any names, but my boss at that time, the deputy chief, believed in the program and believed in that partnership. So I think it needs that executive sponsor from the police side, that person that believes in the partnership, right? And I think at the time, we all believe, like, when you're in the policing, it's what's in it for me. So if I partner with you, what's in it for me? So what's in it for policing is that professional security side of more eyes, more awareness, to be able to work together, especially in the downtown core, but anywhere like the GTA, and having those partnerships. So, the seamless communication, training, intelligence sharing, that we're working together. So everybody's getting what they want from that relationship, right? So if you don't feel you're gaining anything, I think, human nature from that relationship, why am I partnering with you? If you're getting 90% of the benefit and I'm only getting 10%, talking to the police side again, where's the benefit? So there was a belief for many years that there was a great benefit to have that partnership when it came to the information sharing, the intelligence sharing, and, going through events like the G20 in 2010 and working with that partnership to, ensuring safety and security for the downtown core. So the police can't, thousands of police officers downtown, you still can't protect everyone and every place. So there's a dependence on that partnership of the security directors, that had, the ownership or the accountability for those buildings to work together to make sure that we had that seamless security. So what's lacking now, I think, is, again, maybe just that awareness, maybe executive leadership from the police again, to refocus on what's important. Partnerships are important because I know every day police agencies are working on the partnerships, whether it's social agencies or whatever it is, communities, diverse communities. But it's that importance of why is the security industry important to policing, and we have to get back to that, and we have to have, I think, someone sponsoring it from that end. From the security side now, I think we just need that leadership to see the worth in it, right? Because if you've seen something like TAPS that's maybe deteriorated in the program over the years, is like, is it worth putting in all that work? And are we going to get to the benefit that we want? And I think right now maybe enough security leaders may think, and it's not a knock on anybody, or it's just, is it worth to put in that work? Because are we going to get to where we want to go? And maybe we just need us together to develop a plan, a strategic plan, and how we approach the police, in this instance, Toronto Police, and in getting that partnership back to like a strong level like we had years ago.
Well, okay, I just want to add to that because, you know, I think partnerships and successful partnerships are the cornerstone of successful programs. So, Chris, I want to ask you, how has policing changed from when you started 3,000 years ago to today? And I would imagine those changes are probably driving the need for more effective partnerships. But how's it changed? When you started as a young constable at 21 years of age, what type of things did you worry about? What was the city of Toronto like? How did the community relate to you versus what you're seeing today, both in Canada and the States?
Yeah, good question, Brian. And yeah, it feels like you know, a lifetime ago. It was 1986, right? And policing, you know, was different then. There was, I would say, the accountability systems weren't in place that we have now. Obviously, you know, I know even in your time, Polaroid cameras were probably, you know, just invented, right? But they're really
1986. Was I born then?
But they're really the oversight and the accountability and the media presence, the cameras, the social media, wasn't there. And Toronto at the time, you know, wasn't as diverse in the communities that there was. So it was, you know, back then you felt that you had a very high percentage of public trust and confidence from the community, and you felt that you're doing, you know, you're doing well. But again, that accountability piece wasn't there. So like the evolution of policing, and it's not a bad thing, it's made policing, I think, more professional. The training and the education and the equipment has just evolved, I think, to a high level. You know, I think the police industry is you know, you're a professional, like you're a lawyer or a security director or an accountant. It's a professional profession, right? And it was a good evolution. But because of that evolution, now, you know, with social media and, you know, different communities that maybe have had, you know, a lack of trust in the police and different, you know, in their, you know, their, wherever they're from, you know, their ethnic origins, you know, that have now moved to Toronto, and I speak in Toronto, is a very diverse community, and it's a good thing. You know,
but you would agree, Chris, part of the evolutionary process was there was a lot of introspection on the part of the police, on the part of the community towards the police. And the police, in many regards, would you not think, reinvented themselves through training, as you said, use of technology, outreach, communications with the public. But no matter what has occurred in the last 5-10 years, it seems that there's a cohort, no matter what is done, that just aren't going to be appreciative of policing. And the solution is defund the police. And some people mean that literally.
I'm going to add something to that, Brian, as well, before Chris answers. I think part of the biggest challenge, and I think the police agencies have largely failed in this respect. They're turning the corner now. But I think what's really hurt them is historically that position of no comment. We know we don't need to share things with you. We know what we're doing. I think that carried that into the modern era where anybody can carry the narrative, right? You get on social media and you say, well, Chris stopped me because I'm whatever, right? Whatever they want to say, they can put that on social media and run with it. And I don't think police departments did a good enough job of countering that argument, at least in the short term. They allowed it to run, right? And they benefited from the positive perception or relationship that they had with the public at the time. But over time, if you say something negative long enough, people start to believe it. And I think that's what's happened with social media. You've had every clown come out of the woodwork and say, well, that copper stopped me because he didn't like me. They don't mention the fact that he was doing 40 over the speed limit, right? Or he did a left turn with no signal and almost hit somebody. Like that's the piece I think really hurt the police department, the media agents, the media side of it anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the police had to evolve. So there was a want and a need to evolve, and I think they have, right? Like Brian said, when it comes to training and the education part of it, and everything else, the building your cultural competence and having hiring strategies to reflect your community and hiring and recruiting from traditionally underrepresented groups in policing. So I think the bar keeps moving. In regards to the media part, Luciano have been part of that in Toronto and Durham, and sometimes again you have to pick your battles and when you want to debate in social media, and you're not always going to win if you get into that debate, right? So yes, no comment is not good, but also in regards to that, I think the police have built their transparency over the last little while, and when it comes to people that are anti-police or public trust, we all know it's eroded. Public confidence has eroded in the police, and I think the policing profession is working to making that better. The reality is, I don't know how far that bar is going to get moved. The way things are, and obviously we all know of incidents in Minneapolis when George Floyd is killed, right? And because of our society and social media, what happened there happens here, right? And then there's that people that have certain beliefs, it now reinforces their beliefs. Look what happened. I knew the police in the city are this. Well, look what happened there. I'm right. So there's that reinforced beliefs of people. And just the last point to that is that the community perception and reality is the same. So if they perceive something, it's as good as reality. So the police have to face that. You have to, you can't get your back up. You have to continue to work on that engagement and that partnership tirelessly to make it better. And sometimes you're not going to make it better. Sometimes you're going to move it a bit. And there's some instance where you're going to move the bar a lot to make community relations better, depending on which community you're dealing with. But it's it's a constant work to get better.
Well,
right?
Picking up on that, constant work to get better. Sometimes you'll make progress. Sometimes you won't move the bar. You talked about the want and need to evolve. Police had to do it. They saw they had to do it. They've invested heavily in training and recruiting underrepresented segments of the community, technology and equipment, sort of to transition to your new life. Okay, a lot of what happens on the streets happens in certain commercial buildings, shopping malls, the Eaton Center. We've had gun violence in there. We've had theft and robberies in there. Big commercial buildings. I think of on the financial district, a couple of shootings in the downtown core. One of the big bank towers, or at least that's where the guy ended up. And so really, as difficult as it's been for the police in this to evolve and to get it right, because you said no matter how hard we try, we're not always going to get it right. What about security? I mean, when you look at all the effort that's gone into policing, when I look at my friends, I look at my wife, her training resume. Policing is a culture of training. I don't think people believe it. From the top right to the constable on the road, they're training all the time. There's all sorts of courses. I was just blown away when I saw what the average police officer had in their resume. What about security? If the police are having challenges, Chris, what are you doing as a security director? And you're in a very high profile, potentially challenging transient area of the city at the downtown core. What do you do? What are your thoughts?
So first of all, Brian, you're right about the training. It's it's constant training, and it's great training that the police receive, and you can justify that training because for the most part, you're investing in someone that's going to be there 30 years or longer. And people, I know both of you left before that, but the majority of police officers stay. So the investment is worth it to make them better, right? In how they they police their communities. So it's worth that investment. I think on the security side, and you're right, in the downtown core, security is dealing with the exact same issues that the police are, right? And in this downtown core right now, and you know, I haven't been here or spent time here for, I would say, coming on 15 years now. It's changed, right? There's a you know, higher number of people with mental health, with addictions, drug use, homelessness, and those three come together. You know, that homeless person is the same person that's experiencing mental health challenges and have addictions or drug use, right? And they're not just in the peripheries of these properties. They're just not on the streets. They're coming into the buildings, right? And the security guard's wearing a uniform, just like the police officer. So it's you know, it's looked upon the same in how you're going to interact with these people and how to, you know, help them for the most part and make things better and use support like the City of Toronto Streets to Homes and all those avenues to help these people. But the issue is the training is going to be a little different. And again, it's not a knock against the security industry, but you know, and I have to say, I believe when it comes to wages or the pay scale for security, they're severely underpaid.
Yeah.
And that's been going on for a long time. And I'd like to see that change. In my position, I'd like to see that change because I think that will help to retain people. You know, it'll help to attract skill, talent, people that want to be in the industry and want to make a difference. You know, from what I've seen in the, you know, almost year that I've been here, you know, the turnover, a high rate of turnover, and it's alarming, right? You know, and many times it's an entry level position. Many times it's, you know, it's a means to an end, whether it's a paycheck just to make some money to pay for school, or it's I'm in security because I want to go to policing, special constable, corrections. So it's hard to keep that employee, you know, in the industry. So when you invest in training, you know, when you look at contract training, how much do you invest in that training, right? And I know security companies, there's some really good security companies out there that are doing their best when it comes to that training. But there has to be a line of how much training do I provide to these people? How long are they staying? Because there's a cost to it. There's a financial cost to it, right? So I think they're dealing with the same issues, but the challenge is that it might be not always the best trained people that are dealing with it, or the best people in the right place when it comes to, if that makes sense. Again, it's not, you know, it's not something negative against the security industry. It is what it is right now.
I think you're entirely right, and I would agree. I think that the salaries are really, really poor, and there's no way, you know, the good quality security officers that are out there don't stay a long time because they do transition into policing or corrections or to something that has career pathing capabilities. And I think that's one of the great weaknesses. And you put it really well, Chris. I never thought of it like that, but you said a police officer is there for 25 or 30 years, you get a return on the investment. It's hard to invest when your turnover rate is like every 3 months, or, you know, every 6 months you lose the guy. And then it's the chicken and the egg discussion. You know, like this industry has to really confront what the issues are. You can't, it can't raise the bar to the next level if you can't attract the right people, then hold them for more than 6 months at a time. And I think you're right. Until that changes, you're not going to see change or substantive change. But I think the markets might help. I think when you start seeing the same stressors happening in buildings that happen on the street, and security officers ending on YouTube because someone videotaped an interaction, it's embarrassing for the corporation they work for. I think there'll be a realization that we have to rethink this model, because the model in place now is the old model that existed 30, 40 years ago. The night watchman just sits there and does nothing. Security is so much more than that. But salaries, other than inflation, have not changed. They haven't kept up. It is ridiculous. You know, you could make more money and have better benefits at Tim Hortons than protecting a building worth $1 billion in downtown Toronto.
Yeah, and that's what happens with the minimum wage going up. It makes it more difficult to retain what little resources are willing to work for that level of pay. I recall somewhere, I can't remember if one of our security providers, Brian, that we know well. I think one time they said that the average person or employee, they expected to retain them for anywhere from 6 months, which was typical, to 2 years. You'd be lucky to have them for 2 years. So you really don't have much of an ROI, a time span for that ROI to develop. So that's an interesting comment.
But look, if I could just throw in, that's a good point. That's one way of looking at the ROI. But the other way of looking at ROI on a 2-year tenure is that guard is going to keep you out of the news. That guard is going to keep your site from doing something stupid that causes demonstrations or people to say, hey, they're a bunch of racists or they're just closed-minded people. So that's another ROI that you've got to look at. But we seem to focus on the other thing, that he's only here for 2 years, so don't invest in the training. But to what cost? At what risk? At what expense?
Well, then we get back into that chicken and egg argument, right? The clients, you get what you pay for, and they don't want to pay for much, and you don't have much funding to be able to. I mean, at the end of the day, they're there to make money. Even the security providers, they can't just throw money out the window just to make you happy.
Well, Chris, I'm sorry. Chris, what have you noticed? I mean, you come from an environment where you guys are laser focused on the mission and you try really hard, and you bring that experience and skill set to the private sector. And I'm not asking you to talk about your employer, but what are your observations about the private sector and their seriousness at fulfilling the mission? Or are they even aware of what the mission is?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, that for instance, contract security, right? You want that provider or the people that work for that provider to feel they belong in your buildings and feel they have some ownership and that accountability of, I may not be an employee of that property management company, but I'm representing that company. And you're right, Brian, they're client facing, they're tenant facing, they're patron facing. They're the first people you see when you come into these spaces. And they even stand out because they're wearing uniform and people see them. So their performance, their conduct, all comes into play by everyone sees them. The eyes are on them, at all times, right? So there is a certain level of performance that you will need from those security guards, right? And like I said, I think for the most part, we need to raise the bar when it comes to the pay scale. And Luke, you're right. The clients like myself have to realize that when you're looking for a security provider, it's not about price, because you want to assume or believe that the more you pay, the better quality you're going to get. And I believe that, right? So I've raised the pay rates at all the properties that since I've been here, because of the expectations, right? The key performance indicators, what you're holding that security provider accountable for, right? When it comes to the contract. So I think the contract itself and what you're looking for when it comes to measurements, for that cost benefit or the ROI, as you talk about, which is more important, but that pay scale has to move up, right? Because you're right. One negative interaction could cost you, if not financially, reputationally.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to property management, reputation is critical. When it comes to you wanting patrons to come into your space, you want more tenants, whether it's retail or office tenants, is that you take a hit in your reputation. Someone's going across the street to the other property management that's offering that office space or that retail space. So security is so vital in helping to protect your assets, and I mean your intangible assets when it comes to your reputation. So you need that. You need the professionalism. You need that level of service, and you have to demand that level of service and have a good partnership, with that contract security. And that's what I'm hoping to build and continue to build every day, is a good partnership, with the company that's providing security for us.
It's all the elements of the property management world, from cleaning to mechanical to janitorial to security, they're all important. But I've always maintained that if cleaning has a bad day and they don't clean your suite, it's not the same as security having a bad day and they're not protecting the parking garage and someone gets robbed or mugged. I mean, the consequences are potentially so much greater. So I'm not saying security is more important than anything else, but it seems that security, certainly in the property management world, doesn't get the recognition they deserve. You know, I'm not saying put more into security, but they get even less than everyone else, which makes it a challenge for professionals like yourself and Luch to run programs and run them successfully.
Yeah, and the only thing I wanted to add on that, Brian, was to Chris's comments. It's not as we've talked about plenty of times. It's not just the client side, right? There's the whole contractor side as well. That even when you're prepared to pay more, there's a lot of contractors that just can't produce the product that you're looking for either. They say they'll be able to, but you'll get that same $14 an hour guard, and except you're paying them $20, no change, and sort of starts to that self-fulfilling prophecy of why am I paying for this guy? Like they can't even produce it. So the industry as a whole, I think, has a lot of introspective issues that they need to really start to revisit and look at in changing how they run business. Chris, I'll ask you a quick question on a model for security that, it's big in Europe. We don't see it here much, but do you think there's a place, especially now with a lot of budget constraints on police departments, cutbacks, defund the police in certain areas. Is there a place for a middle ground there for a special, I don't want to say special constable, but if you go to Europe, there's security guards that are just that much more professional. They are able to make a career out of it. And they don't do, the gun calls, but they'll do the stuff that takes up police time that they can do. Go and take B&E reports or, traffic controls, things like that. Is there a place for that? I know they've talked about it in Toronto often, but it always ends up going away. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in my mind, I want to make sure that the security industry becomes more professional. And part of being more professional is being able to adapt and get better, like the policing industry when it comes to training and, education and equipment, to be able to look after the property that you've been put in a position to look after when it comes to providing, safe, secure, healthy, vibrant environment for everyone in that property. So I think you're referring to Luch, in the States, there's a lot of gated communities where they're being policed by security, whether it's, different status like a special constable, but they're armed security and they're dealing with the issues. And when they reach out to the police, it's the last resort or whatever, but they are providing policing in essence for that community. I think that model has to work here also because, as police budgets keep going up, numbers of police officers go down. Policing has become very complex when it comes to investigating certain things, cyber crimes, the growing human trafficking industry, and all the other crimes that the police are dealing with. And if you notice over the years, if the police had a capacity for, say, Toronto had 5,000 or 5,500 police officers, policing is getting busier, more complex, but those numbers have gone down. And not only have they gone down, but they've had to find from within to build units like human trafficking units and domestic violence units and gun and gangs units. And it wasn't, police services boards in cities adding to the numbers saying, okay, we'll give you more police officers. It was basically, here's your budget, make this work from within. And what happens with that is it thins out the front line and it thins out the response. And I remember when I started, Brian, back in the days, how many people were in that parade room for our briefing compared to how many police officers that are working frontline patrol now, right? So in saying all that, the police aren't always coming, right? A 911 call or an emergency call changes now. The bar changes in regards to what they're coming for, right? A non-emergency call, you're going to be waiting for a while for police response because they're busy. They're dealing with priority calls. And now there's online reporting. So now you're not even going to see a police officer. So I think the security industry in Canada and Ontario has to build that capacity from within. And I know in the properties we're at, the training is the escalation. They have your use of force options, right? But it's last resort.
Yeah.
right? And arresting or apprehending someone is a last resort, whether it's for a criminal offense or trespassing, because now you're now dependent on the police to respond, because you're supposed to advise them forthwith, and they're the only ones that could release. So that's the last resort when it comes to that. So I think the security industry really has to build that capacity to make sure that they're privately policing, and I don't want to use that in a wrong way, their turf or the properties that they've been put in charge of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that is a great example, because that's an area where security could really do a lot more to alleviate the pressures on police officers. Things like the homeless guy who's out front of the property. Like, why are we calling the police automatically? Which is what was going on at a lot of properties that I used to take to oversee. Another good example, Chris, I would say, like protests, right? Automatic call to the police. Well, why? What kind of protest is it? Are they being peaceful? Are they compliant? Is there any risk to public safety? If all those things are checked off, then why are we putting the stress on police officers to come down and oversee something that doesn't really need to be overseen? So I think, to your point, better trained guards are going to be able to better manage those situations and assess the risks before they make that phone call to the police and tie up 4 or 5 cars unnecessarily.
I just want to add to what you're both saying is, I think that one of the challenges security has, or hurdles security has to overcome, is unlike the police, there isn't effective oversight in the security world. There isn't oversight at the property level, even with trained supervisors. There isn't a regulatory body like the police have a police service board, and there's the provincial government and their oversight mechanism. Security is, and I know, Chris, when you said the word private policing, because I've used that term a lot, but you're a little bit hesitant, because the challenge is that as we take on more responsibility, there has to be oversight, proper oversight, effective oversight, maybe at the provincial level, municipal level, maybe subsequent to the local police service board. But without that, security can't take on more responsibility, because they're not going to have the trust of the public. They're just going to be a bunch of vigilantes that are not controlled. And that's one of the challenges that we have to overcome on the security side. I think police have oversight up to yin-yang right now, from civilian review committees, internal professional standards, legislative, civilian police service boards, but security has nothing. Yeah. Just the owner of the company or the management team of the company. I think that's one of the things holding us back and getting us into the 21st century.
And with that, I'm looking at the clock, Brian. We're going to move to close this episode off.
Oh, geez.
I did want to say, when you were policing, they only had 2 courses, right? Horseback riding and the tablet riding with the stone. Is that right?
You talking to Chris?
I think he's talking to you, Brian. I think it was when you were patrolling the saloons back in the heyday there.
Well, walkie-talkies,
enforcing the Liquor License Act.
Walkie-talkies are just being investigated, but we use, or portables, but we use smoke signals quite effectively.
Oh, good, excellent. All right, so let's close up with closing comments. We're going to turn it over to Chris first as our guest.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. And now in my new world, as we talked about, I'm going to continue working on making the security industry more professional, so we could attract the right people to do the job. And Luciano, you mentioned earlier about security companies are saying, we're going to give you these quality people, but the reality is with that turnover, it's hard to that box kind of gets empty pretty quick when it comes to trying to bring that same level or a higher level of performance from your security guards that you're bringing to property. So I think it's just continue working on the training, the education, the equipment, and just being relentless in making the industry more professional and attracting those people to come and want to work here. And some people making a career, actually looking at security as a career, not a means to the end. Like I said, I'm here because I want to go to corrections or policing or wherever I want to go. That I want to build a career here. I want to be a professional security person and build my way up through an organization to become a manager, director, or whatever. So for the policing side, like I said earlier, my heart is still with policing, and I look at all the challenges that policing face these days, and I'm glad I'm not there, because they are, some big challenges. And how do we, I say we, but how does policing become better in building that public trust, building that confidence, because the gap just seems to keep increasingly big, and then how to get it back. And I think what can't happen on the police side is that you can't have the leadership or anywhere in the organization now having an apathy for, well, we're doing our best and look what's happening and we're going to give up. Like, you have to be, as relentless in the security industry, you have to be as relentless in policing to keep making things better, building those bridges with communities and those diverse communities, and working with different groups, Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and all those other pieces that are now part of policing. Is that on the policing side, you can't give up, because you have to get better, because you can't be effective in policing your community if you don't have that public trust and confidence. You really can't. So
I just want to thank Chris, Deputy Chief Fernandes. You're a good friend. You've been a great ambassador of the Toronto Police and Durham Regional Police. Some of the, I think, most successful partnerships that Toronto Police have enjoyed with the private security sector, many of them have been under your leadership or command. And I think we need to have more of these type of relationships that are not built on need, but they're premised on trust and respect. Because, my boss, your chief, could say you've got to play with Brian and Brian's got to play with Chris. But if we don't like each other, respect each other, trust each other, we're not going to succeed. And I just want to thank you, Chris, for the, almost 20 years, I guess, that we've known each other. You've been a great partner and friend and ambassador, and you've always been very respectful to us on the security side of the fence. So thank you.
That concludes this podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and will join us in a couple of weeks for our latest episode. Please remember to like and follow us on our sponsor's webpage, brianclaman.com, where you can leave us your comments and suggest topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening, and don't forget to protect your assets.